Good morning, I'm Saini at the University of Canberra in my weekly conversations with Michelle Grattan. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Deep.
Michelle, it's a beautiful sunny morning in Canberra, but the clouds are gathering on the international scene with Americans pulling out of the Paris Accord on climate change. Although Mr. Turnbull has said that Australia will remain supportive and remain committed, it has global implications. And what do you think those would be?
Clearly, it weakens the whole agreement. Only a minority of countries are out of it. I think 2 countries besides the United States. But the fact that the United States quits the agreement is a big blow to it. It's said that it's not a fatal blow, but nevertheless a huge blow. For Australia, for Malcolm Turnbull, there are implications. He preempted the decision by reiterating that Australia would stay in the agreement, but already, even before the Trump decision came out, there were a number of coalition backbenchers who went on the record saying we should in fact follow the United States if that happened. So I think there will be pressure. I think that Malcolm Turnbull will want to resist that pressure, will have to resist that pressure, but it's just one more thing that adds to his problems.
And the risk, of course, is that when a nation that is the second biggest emitter and the most powerful nation on earth pulls out of such an important accord, that has ramifications in terms of others feeling less committed to it.
Yes, that's right, and so it could erode over time. It comes in the Australian context just ahead of the major report from the chief scientist next week on energy security. So energy policy, climate change are going to be quite big debates on the federal scene in the next few weeks.
On another front, the statement of the ASIO director, Duncan Lewis, in response to Pauline Hanson's question that there is no connection between asylum seekers and terrorism, has set off a local storm here in Australia. The right is certainly attacking his statements. He's tried to contextualize it since then and try to take some heat out of it. Has that worked, and what are the implications of it?
His wording did give ammunition to the right because he really had needed to be more precise in that original answer to Pauline Hanson, because in fact perpetrators of terrorist crimes in Australia recently have either been refugees or come from refugee families. So while his general point was accurate, his language was not couched in a way to be 100% accurate and precise. What we've seen in the last few days is that the government and the opposition have united to defend Duncan Lewis, and the right, nevertheless, have used this as a point of attack to make the argument that's frequently coming from commentators on the right that violent Islam isn't discussed enough. One interesting point in this is that Tony Abbott has taken up the issue, and he has been, albeit in fairly moderate terms, but he's been critical of what Duncan Lewis said. Now, from the point of view of ASIO, it's important to remember that it's very necessary for them, for their work, to have good relations with the Muslim community. So in comments that ASIO makes, it's always very careful to stress the fact that most Muslims are very peace-loving, positive citizens, and to seek this cooperation that's so vitally necessary if plots are to be disrupted and information is to be gathered and radicalisation is to be curbed where possible.
Staying again within the Parliament, the government remains under pressure with the release of another news poll that shows a coalition behind by 47 to 53, Labour pulling ahead at 53% support now. And this is the 13th poll in a row that shows government behind. Government had hung its hopes from the budget that would turn things around for it. That hasn't happened yet, at least. where do you think we are going, and what does government need to do to actually convince the Australian public that it is worth supporting?
Many commentators said that Malcolm Turnbull, in fact, had a good week in Parliament last week before this news poll was taken, and indeed a good week this week. Labor's been under quite a lot of criticism for some of the stands it's taken on budget issues. So I think that the coalition would be worried that it hasn't yet translated what most people thought was a pragmatic budget and not a bad performance by the government into some sort of result in the polls. Now, the mantra will be repeated that it takes a while for budget measures to seep through into people's consciousness. But it does suggest, at least to this point, that people are not listening to the government and that they've become set in their views, that they are so disillusioned that they're just not tuning in, or they're receiving these messages, these new measures, sceptically. That's a real worry for the government if it can't see some improvement in the next couple of months.
Then there is the hint by Scott Morrison that we could expect a temporary slowdown in the economy. Moderate that kind of mild warning by saying that the recent decline in housing prices seems to indicate that the budget measures are working and that the government policies are having the desired effect. Has he struck the balance? And also, when you put these two things together, where do you think we are going as a country in terms of economy?
Well, if in the next growth figures we do see a bit of a slowdown, I think that that's bad news for the government. Basically, Scott Morrison saying the figures are likely to be on track in the longer term, but because everything is so speeded up in terms of news cycle and every figure is dramatised, anything that looks to suggest the economy is off course, I think, will be quite unsettling, especially to business confidence, which is very, very important. The housing market, the budget produced measures that were pretty small scale, really, and if prices do come off in Sydney and Melbourne, then at least the government will be vindicated in the balances it struck there. But there's a way to go on housing and, of course, on the general economic figures and outlook, and the next 6 months will tell a story one way or another in those areas.
Yeah, that'll play out over the next 6 months or so, but I think that over the week that's coming, the big news is going to continue to be America pulling out of the Paris Accord.
Yes, I think that'll have ripples for quite a while, and we'll all be pretty consumed by the climate and energy debate between now and the time we meet next.
That's right. I assume we'll have a lot to talk about that next week.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.